And by the way, we've seen it, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
you just got to
We
watch
have
every
a
month.
lot of evidence
That's right.
that this is real. What's noteworthy too, I think people should realize is that this is an iceberg. So to the extent that there's evidence, right? In other words, stories reported in the mainstream media. Um, I've seen bankruptcy filings, right?
Right.
Where part of the justification for the bankruptcy is cyber attacks. But aside from that, this is an iceberg, and what I mean by that is the vast majority of what's going on is unreported.
Right.
This is characteristic of crime of all types,
Mm.
whether it's a personal injury
Yeah.
thing, or
Mm.
a rape or a beating or something like that, all the way
Right.
to somebody stole some money out of your pocket.
Right.
People are reticent to report any type of crime, and so we're only seeing a small fraction of what's really happening.
Right, right. And that's why this is such an important podcast. This why I said, "Oh my gosh, please come join," because this is the message, we want to get out, right? Which
Yep.
is, if you don't take it seriously, if this is impacting businesses today, just think of once that becomes
Yeah.
the everybody's doing now
The
that on top
estimates
of it.
are that we're seeing somewhere between 10 and 15%
Right,
of what's really happening is actually getting reported.
right.
10 to 15%. That's 1 in 10.
Yeah, that's
So for every person who comes forward and says, "Yeah, I was cyber attacked," there's nine other people with their hand over their mouth.
right, right. Well, okay, because that's such this is a pretty serious thing. This is why we share about cybersecurity, so we actually know what these risks are. But how should a CISO approach this, material business risk? How should they handle this? What should they do? What
Mhm.
needs to be in their mindset?
Yeah. Well, people of my vintage, like we grew up when it wasn't a material business risk. So if you haven't turned the corner on that yet, you need to. And you need to realize that what's important these days is cyber resilience,
Hmm.
right?
Right,
And it's kind of ironic. I hear people in my profession talk about we have to assume breach. Okay, well, I like that. I think that actually makes a lot of sense.
right,
So show me your investment in detection, respond, and recovery capabilities.
right.
Don't tell me that you're still pouring the vast majority of your resources into protection,
Hmm.
because if we're going to assume breach, then you're talking out of both corners of your mouth here.
Right,
You gotta you as the CISO have to turn the corner on this, right?
right.
You've got to get up to speed. Now, from there, you now have to go to your senior decision makers
Yeah,
and the people who control resource allocation for you. And
right,
now you got to get them to come on board with this idea that cyber is a material business risk.
right,
And the best way to do that, I have found, is you better understand how your organization makes money. Or if you're working in a not-for-profit space, how
right,
does your organization achieve its mission? Because guess what? Maybe your not-for-profit isn't selling, but it's fundraising.
right.
Your money from somewhere.
Yeah,
How are you doing that?
that's right.
There are four key business processes that every organization is running, right? So you've
Yep.
got order, order to fulfillment. How does that happen? You've got hire to retire.
Yep.
You've
That's right.
got record to report,
Hmm.
right?
That's right.
And a fourth one that always escapes me. But there's four,
We're gonna
okay?
get to the fourth one.
So as a CISO, you better understand how all four of those things work. And that, you don't need to know down at the nitty gritty detail, but you better have a conceptual diagram of how this stuff works.
Yeah.
Now, the bonus for this is if you've done this, you know by doing this, couple of things. First is all the most important people in your organization, because those are the people who are in charge
Yeah.
of the most important processes.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
right.
So
Yeah.
that gives you a chance to go out there and talk to them and say, "Please tell me, how do we do record to report? How does that happen? Please walk me through that."
Right.
And so that's a great way for you to use your question as a bridge to build a working relationship with somebody that you really need to do that with. Now, not only are you going to start building relationships with all the key people,
Yep.
but you're going to know where all the most important digital assets are. Because by definition, because those four business processes are the most important thing, every digital asset involved in them are de facto most important.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, by doing that, you'll be able to come back to the person who you report to and other people in your steering committee or your board or whomever,
Yeah.
and you'll be able to come back to them and you'll be able to talk intelligently like a business person about what's
Right.
going on.
Right. Absolutely. Now, by the way, that you're talking about a lot of people there. How do
Mhm.
you get that type of buy-in? I mean, that tends to be right because you're only as strong as the team together can
That's right.
collectively
Yeah.
move, not
Yeah.
singularly, not siloed,
Hmm.
one unit. And so,
Yeah.
how does that happen?
Well, I think uh, you have to convince folks, and you have to realize that what's in it for each individual person in the collective is different, right? So if you go to the chief legal officer and you're trying to get your chief legal officer on board with your program,
Right.
don't talk to the chief legal officer about things like availability of systems.
Right.
That's not their top issue. Their top issue is how can we stay out of lawsuits? Talk about how your program is going to create business value in terms of staying out of lawsuits, right?
Right.
How is your program creating business value by keeping regulators from showing up and accusing you of dastardly deeds
Mm,
related to your mission?
right.
In the same way, don't go to the CFO and talk about high availability of systems, right? The CFOs, that's not their number one concern. You need to talk to them about how you're um, you know being a good steward of the
Right.
organization's resources. You need to talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So you got to go to each one and you got to say you got to explain it in a way that makes sense for them. And
Okay.
if you go and learn about these four key processes that I talked about, well, the three I mentioned anyway,
The
what's
three.
the fourth one?
I told you we're
Um,
gonna get to that fourth
we'll
one.
get that fourth one. But if you've done that homework, then these people already know who you are. They at least
Right.
recognize you,
Right.
and they've had a good experience with you. Because listen, anytime somebody comes to you and says, "Please tell me all about your work,"
Mm-hmm.
that's a cool thing, isn't it? Isn't that
Yeah.
like, oh, you want me to talk about me, my favorite subject?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I
I can
mean,
handle it.
you're not brown nosing people. You just go into them and saying, "I'd really like to understand this. Will you please help me?" And
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
will.